Light Yagami and Kiyotaka Ayanokoji are some of the most psychologically complex characters in anime and manga. Each of them revels in the moral gray, bringing about the inhumanity in both of their characters. Similarly, they're also genius manipulators. Light effectively became a god, having a power that ascended common sense and reality, which warped his mind in the process. In Ayanokoji's case, he was an artificial genius, the product of the White Room, who could see through everything and anyone. They both see people as pawns towards a greater goal that they're trying to reach. They reconfigure their environment to suit their needs under any situation. Both are highly intelligent, have a calculated mindset, and move like kings on the chessboard. With these two amazing characters, there's an ongoing discussion that needs an answer. Who is the better manipulator? Without further ado, let's start with Light. Light already possessed many of the Dark Triad traits to begin with. He was Machiavellian in nature, viewing reality through an ends justify the means situation. He was a borderline narcissist, showcasing unparalleled sadism and depicting traits of psychopathy. Light was a lot more jaded than Death Note will give him credit for. And while having these overtly questionable traits to begin with is already subject to scrutiny, the Death Note only made matters worse. As a wise man once said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you could argue that his greatest manipulation was his own mental state. Light instilled trust in his pawns, using them as a shield for his own decrepit sanity. His father, who was also the lead detective, was the easiest one to fool. With his idealistic notion of justice, there was no way he would ever question his son. He deludedly vouched for Light, making others believe that he's a comrade and a valuable asset. Then you have Misa, who was infatuated with Light to a psychotic degree. At this point, you have someone who's willing to cover your betrayals, and another who will do just about anything to satisfy you. And with an overwhelming lack of evidence, there was no way they would catch on to Light unless he exposed himself. And then you have L, the only person who had the capabilities of finding out who Kira was. Light studied the message, keep your friends close, but enemies closer, and he ran with it. Light was constantly thinking multiple steps ahead, dissecting the personalities, weaknesses, values, strengths, and histories of all his enemies. He understood something very well. The more information you gather, the more data you soak up, the easier it will be to manipulate your pawns. This would not only give them more trust in Light, but get them further from the truth. The most important element of conversation is listening, and Light was a great listener. And in tandem with all these great assets, Light was also cold-hearted to a fault. He had the resolve to make tough decisions and not bat an eye or question his motives. When encountering a formidable enemy, the objective is to eliminate them as quickly as possible. You either turn a pawn into a queen or knock them off the chessboard. But when you get too close to the sun, you'll get burned. And the credit goes to L for his self-awareness of his own manipulation. Light understood his position as Icarus. To move forward and fool everyone, he had to fool himself. Utilizing the information he acquired about the Death Note when his back was against the wall, he effectively erased all his memories of the book. He let his emotions speak the truth, and they were undeniable. And in many regards, this manipulative practice supersedes the likes of Ayanokoji, who lacks the capabilities of expressing emotion. With this instantaneous switch in his personality, he fooled a team of trained detectives who spent their time in close vicinity of Kira. In some cases, he also manipulated L into believing that he was innocent even when there was concrete evidence against his girlfriend. On top of that, as the self-proclaimed god Kira, he was also manipulating the masses, using the fear of death as his trigger. Where Light succeeds is with his emotional manipulation. He's a master manipulator and an unparalleled genius. But despite his ingenuity, his lack of self-awareness for his own sanity was his greatest flaw. When he defeated L, he let his ego get the best of him. His god complex overtook his personality, and when he touched the fire, he was burned. He failed to retain his composure, and despite his feats, he won the battle, but L won the war. Because L was a monster, he understood that the only person who could be his friend was another monster. Ergo, light. He was constantly collecting data, and it was that same information that played a pivotal role in Nier and Mello capturing and pinpointing Light as the villain. As you guys will find out, AniKoji makes up for many of these shortcomings.
In this world, winning is everything. And in the end, I'm going to win.
AniKoji was the prodigy of the White Room. He's a demon king in a class of monsters, self-aware of his superiority, showcasing sociopathic tendencies, who perceives everything through a lens of data and logic. In terms of his physical and mental capacities, he's perfect, which is why he was dubbed the perfect human and the only success of the White Room. AniKoji has two main objectives, pursuing his freedom and defeating his father, and he will do anything to manipulate those odds into his favor. He got 50s all across the board to send a message to a specific person. In doing so, he got placed in Class D, the class of defects, and blended into the background. This is how AniKoji goes about pulling the strings. He purposely stays out of the spotlight. This highlights the genuine differences between Light and AniKoji. Light utilizes the Death Note as an active approach and his weapon of choice, while AniKoji perfectly calculates each possible outcome, stays out of the conflict, using his pawns as his means of practice. AniKoji lays the groundwork. Every special exam is pulled by his strings. He rarely makes direct moves. He just does the math, and the results work into his outcome. It's almost like precognition. A perfect manipulator is someone who's able to regulate their emotions under the most stressful circumstances. AniKoji's manipulation is subtle. He's unable to deceive his enemies with emotion because that doesn't fit his capacity. Instead, he lays low, enforcing credit on others, downplaying himself, and maintaining his aloof demeanor. And that's because it's far easier to deceive someone if they underestimate your abilities. Because AniKoji lacks the ability to express emotion, he becomes a reflecting glass that people can infer their goodwill onto. He uses Horikita, Hirata, Kushida, anyone with some level of competence that he can utilize as a mask. And that's because AniKoji is a necessary evil, a monster who will do things that others won't. And that's why for the entirety of Classroom of the Elite, everyone believes that it's Horikita who's the mastermind behind Class D. In the first uninhabited island exam, AniKoji effectively dictated the course and action of every class, discovered the objectives of his foes, relationships, and ties to one another. AniKoji only exposes himself if he chooses to. He was aware of Ryuin's scheming, and so he played the fool in front of Ibuki. Also, she could lead him to Ryuin. He let his class fall to disarray as a deception while picking up on small hints of data and using it to his advantage. And when the time was right, he turned the tables on all the other classes, and Class D was victorious. And of course, all the credit went to Horikita, the supposed mastermind of Class D. This is just how AniKoji operates. He gets lost in the crowd and no one catches on. That's why he's always able to get away with it. In the second year island exam, he took it to another level by making himself an unknown variable. And that's because in any survival of the fittest scenario, it's AniKoji who undeniably stands at the top. All he did was earn enough points to benefit his class while staying under the top 10 and using Koenji as his mask. As AniKoji likes his freedom, this was the perfect opportunity to control everything. He made small calculated decisions that had a drastic effect on the outcome of the test, and by embarking on these necessary actions, he got Koenji in first place, defeated Nagumo while deterring his objective, eliminating and expelling 5 of the third-year groups, and he inhibited his own expulsion in the process. It was an undeniable win for AniKoji and a massive defeat for Nagumo. And these are just 2 situations. In every special exam, in every instance of action, it's always AniKoji at the center. Whether it be the first years, Ryuin, Sakayanagi, Ichinose, and anyone in between, AniKoji is manipulating them. He sows the seeds early on, so the flowers always bloom in his favor. AniKoji is absolutely a skilled manipulator. Rather than forcing someone onto a path, they come to the conclusion, so it's almost like an original thought, and therefore there's no paper trail. And AniKoji's manipulation pertains to every facet of his being. He's a talented fighter, but rarely resorts to extreme violence. He's observant of his surroundings, but carries himself like his eyes are dead. He has genius level academia, but always gets an average result on a test. He has an immense understanding of human nature, but he always plays the fool. When you compare situation by situation, I think it's fair to conclude that AniKoji is the better manipulator. My argument against Light is that if he was never able to grasp the power of the Death Note, he would never have become the manipulator who propagates himself on that pedestal. The power of the Death Note is essentially the cornerstone of his god complex. He viewed criminals as subhumans, while completely disregarding the atrocities he's committing and validating them as justice. Despite his intentions, his actions border on mass genocide. And once L took the L, he lost his composure, almost like he lost his purpose. And even when he tried to misdirect L, it was still his information that brought him up on his charges. Ever since the beginning, and even after L passed away, Light was still the prime suspect. Even though he succeeded in manipulating everyone, he never actually manipulated L. In contrast, AniKoji only reveals his true nature when he chooses to do so. He bases every decision on logic and doesn't walk on eggshells. AniKoji is a chess master, which exemplifies his calculated mindset. While playing the game, he thinks of thousands of different possibilities, and each one works to his advantage. He's cool, calm, and collected under pressure. He never lets stress get the best of him, and he's highly intelligent. And that's why AniKoji is a better manipulator than Light.